Greetings all, and welcome to the 10th episode of the V.T.P, or the Veteran Trainer's Perspective. Today, in celebration of making it to our 10th complete episode, we are going to be taking an introductory look at something that I have had my eyes on for a long time. When you are a part of the franchise for as long as I have been, you do start to question some things, and curiosity will eventually get the better of you as you try and figure out what's really going on in the world. That's right, I'm talking about Pokemon fan theories, and today we are going to start to tackle, and in my humble opinion, potentially debunk the basis for one of the greatest, if not the greatest of them all. Today, on this episode of the V.T.P, I'm going to be taking a look at the Great Pokémon War fan theory, and offering an alternative explanation behind one of the primary pillars that served as the original foundation of the theory: Lieutenant Surge's words on war. The theory of the Great Pokémon War is one that is far-reaching in its implications, and by far the largest, most well-documented, and most complex fan theory that fans of the series have ever crafted. And to try and go into in-depth detail on it here would take up an entire video on its own. And in truth, so many have already taken a stab at it that I'd likely be repeating the words of others that if they just did that. So, to summarize it very simply, this theory posits that before the time of the original Generation 1 games, there was a great war that took place across the world that embroiled the world and led to the destruction of many lives and the setup of everything we see in the Pokemon games. This includes things such as the lack of adults and people in major cities, the background history of many characters, and things of that sort, and in truth, it is a fairly well-formed theory that does have a great deal of supporting evidence behind it. For the most part, I understand most of the points that have been raised to support the theory, and as a whole, it is a wonderful thing to see have crafted by fans that are so enthusiastic about the series. However, for as grand as the entire theory is, there is a glaring problem with it to me, and it is a problem that I have not really seen addressed on this platform before, and that problem lies with where the entire theory stemmed from. In a conversation in the original Red and Blue games, Lieutenant Surge, the third gym leader that trainers are supposed to face, and an expert in the electric type, gives the following piece of dialogue when you first speak to him. "Hey, kid, what do you think you're doing here? You won't live long in combat, that's for sure. I tell you, kid, electric Pokemon saved me during the war. They zapped my enemies into paralysis, the same as I'll do to you." This particular mentioning of war is what really started the landslide of analyses that led to the formation of the Great Pokémon War fan theory. And in truth, the mentioning of a war of some sort without any clear evidence presented explaining it does leave it open to interpretation, and the minds of the world have latched onto it strongly. But I think that in the case of this crucial piece of evidence, we need to take a step back a bit and really think of what is being said here. Is Lieutenant Surge really talking about some sort of great war that happened preceding the games that we all know and love? Or perhaps, is there something in the history of the real world that may offer a simpler explanation? Let's first take a step back and assume that maybe, just maybe, there's just been a lot of smoke being blown around with this theory. How can we possibly show that this is the case? Well, I think that if we take a look at the real-world history of the games and their construction, we might find that there is more to Lieutenant Surge's line than initially seems present. What if, instead of there being a war in the canon of the games, he is referring to a war that actually happened in the real world? This might seem silly at first, but let us consider the fact that the first few generations of Pokemon did in fact contain many references to real-world locations and creatures before it was established that the Pokemon universe takes place on a world different from our own. References to Indian elephants in the Pokédex entries of Raichu and Ghastly, as well as references to South America and the Pokédex entries of Mew, shows very much that the developers had the real world very much in mind when designing the games, and that makes sense, as the first 4 regions were named after actual areas in Japan, and it's always easier to go with what you know first before trying something different. It should also be noted that under this same thought process, we have to look realistically at the possibility of the games actually being designed with the Great Pokémon War in mind. The original games were in development for a very long time, and it wasn't even known if they would succeed or not. Heck, even when they did, Game Freak thought for sure that Generation 2 was going to be the end of the series. And yet, here we are, decades later, and the franchise is stronger than ever. With that said, if the creators of the game didn't have any idea they would succeed or not, and just wanted to make a successful product with a unique attribute, can one really think that they had the idea of some great war in the back of their minds the whole time, setting up someday to exploit or otherwise take advantage of some war or leave something more for fans to find? Seeing as they didn't know if there were even going to be fans, such a presumption seems pretty shaky, if not flat out unlikely. So, even if the fans believe this war must have happened, the fact that the developers likely did not have such a war in mind when designing the first games, the games from which Lieutenant Surge's famous line originated from, sort of undercuts the stability of the theory as a whole. So if that is indeed the case, can we find an explanation that makes more sense? Well, I believe that we can, and it all comes down to something quite simple but important: the location and status of Lieutenant Surge himself. It is said that Lieutenant Surge is known as the Lightning American, so it is a clear tip-off that he is not native to the region, namely Japan, where the Kanto region is based. Additionally, his name alone and his words show that he was a former soldier of some sort, or at the very least, a part of the military in the past. So we know that he is from the United States of America, but is now living in Japan, and that he served in the military and was part of some great war. Why would he be in the area then, if that is the case? Well, in some cases, members of the military, after a serious conflict, may not return home, instead choosing to move into the land they were fighting in, or at least somewhere close by. So it can be drawn that this might be what Lieutenant Surge is doing, enjoying his life after a military operation in some foreign country, not too far from where he is currently residing. If that is the case, then if we are looking at him as part of the real world, what war could possibly link up to where he is currently residing that happened in the recent past, relative to the Generation 1 games? And I do mean recent, as in the original artwork of the series, Lieutenant Surge, at most, looks to be in his 30s or 40s. Is there a conflict relative to the original release dates of the games in the mid-1990s that makes sense with all of this? Well, there is, in fact. The Vietnam War. The Vietnam War took place from 1955 to 1975, though US troops were recalled in 1969, and the location of Vietnam is not too much of a stretch to see as a likely source for anyone that have cared to come to Japan. Moreover, there is something to be said for the conscription that occurred in those days before it eventually ended. As well, it ended in 1963, that does not mean that there could not have been the enlisting of volunteers from that time, so it could be feasibly said, even if it is unlikely, that volunteers could have joined the service and entered into war at that time. Now, we said that Lieutenant Surge looked to be at the most in his 40s. Well, at that time, the minimum age of conscription was 17. If we do the math and assume that, in the best possible scenario, Lieutenant Surge joined the military at the absolute minimum age, going to the release date of the original games, adding 27 years to get to 1996 would make him 44 years old, which is right in the range of possibility, and not too far towards one end or the other. In fact, if we wanted to go all the way back to the very beginning of the series' development, which lasted 6 years, taking away 6 years would make him 38, which is also a great fit for the hypothesis. So, if in fact Lieutenant Surge did in fact fight in the Vietnam War, his general appearance would help to support this just based on his possible age alone. With all of this said, at the very least, I think that this evidence does help to paint this important piece of the Great Pokémon War theory in a different light, and maybe at least show that one of the most important, if not the founding pillar of the theory, may be one of misunderstanding, not taking into account the real-world nature of the original games. I have yet to tackle the rest of the theory as of right now, but that may be saved for another day, in the hopes that this bit alone may spark further debate about the validity of the theory, and maybe provide a different perspective on how all of it has come together over the years. If you want to see me tackle the rest of the many parts of this theory, or even look at other popular Pokemon fan theories, just let me know, and we can make that happen as a future episode. Regardless, I hope that this little examination of this one aspect of a much larger whole has intrigued you, and maybe inspired you a bit more to look into fan theories yourself. And with that, I wish you well, and ask that you make sure to tune in for the next episode of the V.T.P. Thank you all for watching this video. It is always an honor to be able to speak with you all on the subject of Pokemon in a way that brings me great joy and happiness in my work. If you would like to keep tabs on past and future work, click that subscribe button, check out my work on DeviantArt, and don't be shy about following me on Twitter, where you can find pertinent announcements on upcoming work before it is officially posted. Links to both can be found in the video description. If you would like to support my work and help Miguel and I continue to produce more content for you and improve upon our presentation, please visit us at my Patreon page, which you can also find a link to in the video description.
No.
With that, I thank you for watching and I wish you well.